The next section of our module is legal ownership of assets. And we know this is a fun topic for everyone. Legal ownership of assets is really important because we understand that relationships change over time. But the nature of the funds you hold and the law does not change unless fund agreements and contracts and other very formal documents change. So we're going to spend some time talking on legal ownership of affiliate funds, but always remembering the difference between legal decisions and business decisions in your organization and legal requirements and relationship building, right? We always are trying to balance all of these things at the same time. And we know it's tough, but that's why we're here for you. So legal ownership of affiliate assets. If your affiliate is a component fund or grouping of component funds at your community foundation, do you all know who those assets belong to? It's the community foundation. No exceptions.
Right, going back to those Treasury regulations and the IRS rules, a component fund must belong to the community foundation in a legal sense, subject to the community foundation's board and the community foundation's governing documents.
Exactly. So when you all submit your national standards fund agreements, and those fund agreements say, if we make a change, you know, we will request approval from this fund holder, or if a change happens, it is allowed to just be told to us by the transferor, right? The transferor says, okay, we enjoyed having a fund here for a while, but now we're going to take it somewhere else. No, no, no. We all have that story, but we all know it takes a lot of knowledge on how to balance relationships, but you are on legally sound footing. That component fund legally belongs to the community foundation. Your board must choose what to do with it based on your mission and what is best for the community. And we're not saying what's best for the community isn't sometimes moving things around and changing things up, but we're making sure that you all are always in control of how that moves forward while balancing relationships. The second is a supporting organization that is an affiliate relationship. And in that situation, the assets legally belong to the supporting organization. But remember, the supporting organization could not exist without the supported organization, which is most likely your community foundation. So check your MOUs, check your contracts and agreements, and make sure that both sides have a clear understanding of not just who the assets belong to, but what the relationship is between your supporting org and your supported org, your community foundation. The next is non-component funds. And this is when we're dealing with independent 501c3s that maybe have some relationship with your community foundation, if that is purely a back office relationship or that you invest funds for them. Now, as Suzanne said, this is tricky, and while we have taught whole sessions at conferences on non-component funds, we don't want to give any rogue actors too many ideas. We heard a lot about this concept after the first time we presented and said, why did you get this idea in everyone's head? It is highly complex. It is legally possible. And if you want to know more, you know where to find the council's legal team. So Suzanne, I have a question for you that I hear all the time. Do component funds, going back to the first type of affiliate that we were talking about, do they have to be endowed?
Good question, Laura. And the simple answer is no. But this idea stems from kind of the early history of community foundations. When community foundations were first being organized, the traditional model was endowment funds. Their mission was to build endowments for the long-term support of the community and the charitable activities in the community. So I think in the early history of community foundations, most funds were established as endowment funds, and I know everybody understands what I mean by endowment fund, that's where the principal of the fund is not spent and grant making is limited to the income earned on the fund. So traditionally, most funds at community foundations were endowment funds, but today especially, it's very common to have funds of all fund types be non-endowed, and this applies to your affiliate funds as well, your geographic affiliate funds. Of course, again, going back to the ultimate control, it is your board's decision whether or not to allow a geographic affiliate fund to be non-endowed, and non-endowed funds have a variety of names attached. I've heard in and out funds and pass-through funds, those kind of funds. That's what I'm talking about when I say non-endowed funds. So ultimately, it's you and your board's decision whether or not to allow geographic affiliates to establish non-endowed funds, but it is definitely an option. And if a geographic affiliate, if there is a need for larger grant making, exceeding the income of the fund, that may be something to consider.
That's a great point. You know, sometimes when I think about this work with affiliates, it's like, oh, there's so many options. It's so great that we can tailor this work. And then at the same breath, I think, gosh, there's so many options. I hope I don't confuse them. But again, that's why we're here with you, walking it through, and we're excited to keep learning. So I'm going to take a minute and deep dive into the most common form of an affiliate, which is the component fund, and it is a non-independent fund. It's a fund within the community foundation. So we just want to hit a couple of quick points that you always want to remember if these are the types of funds you manage. First, I'll be surprised if you don't know this one, but ultimate decision-making authority must lie with the community foundation board. There can be committees, right? This is going into number 2. You can have advisory committees, but we need to be clear that advisory means advisory. And here's where that line blurs. You have a fund. The fund is for a geographic affiliate. The fund name is Geographic Affiliate Foundation. The advisory committee is called that foundation board. How is that not its own foundation and its own board? Well, because the legal structure doesn't allow for it. But again, this is where we get into our relationship issues. If we're calling people boards, if we're calling their fund foundations, we have to understand that we're taking on some risk of confusion, both in that relationship and with the community. So if you're using these words, and we understand some of you do, we're not saying anyone's breaking the law. We just want to remind you that the more something feels or is perceived to be independent with independent control, the more relationship work you will have to do, because the law will always stay the law.
And can I make a point, Lara, about charitable solicitation, because this is really a good point. Yes, I know you have geographic affiliates, and they like to call their advisory committee of the board, and they like to call their fund a foundation. But this does come into play sometimes with your state charitable solicitation laws, because most state charitable solicitation laws require that when you're out soliciting contributions for the foundation, you be accurate, be forthcoming as to the ultimate recipient of the contribution. And so if your geographic affiliate is out fundraising, calling itself a foundation, calling its advisory committee a board, and the public is now thinking that it is its own legal entity and they are giving to this geographic affiliate and not to the community foundation, that can be misleading and sometimes could result in falling afoul of your charitable solicitation rules.
Suzanne, that's such a great point that I actually want to encourage our listeners to maybe pause here pause the recording and have a discussion about if your community foundation is called Community Foundation and your board is called the board, and you have any funds that have the word foundation and it's not filed by the word fund, and you have something that's called a board, talk about, from the perception of the community, how the community knows the difference between your affiliate and you. And again, this isn't to scare anyone, but let's talk for a minute about how sometimes perception can be reality, and maybe you all will sort of see some important parts of how you communicate, and you know that these things aren't always legal. They flow into programming and donor relations and grant committee relations. So again, I encourage you all to pause here for a moment and talk through if you have the word foundation in any of your funds, and if you're calling any of your advisory groups boards, how does the community understand the difference between that and your community foundation? But moving on to additional parts of the most common form of an affiliate, there's our favorite words again. Variance power must be part of your agreement or part of the bylaws. Both the host community foundation and the fund transferors must understand variance power, or you don't have a component fund. And some of you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal if it's a component, non-component? I'll just have non-component funds. Well, okay, but you're going to want to file with the Security Exchange Commission and your state regulators, and somebody may be taking Series 7s or 27s. So before you get into that, think about what it would look like if you became a financial investment firm and if you're ready to take that leap. The fifth point is fundraising events and projects, regardless of who is putting them on in your mind, they are attributed to you, which also likely means you, Community Foundation, are liable. So let's take a moment here and think about what that means. If somebody starts a GoFundMe site, if somebody decides to have a walkathon and bring in funding, and somebody gets hurt, if somebody has a dinner at their home and is wanting to raise money for one of your funds, if it is a component fund, there is a string that goes right back to you. And that's not meant to scare you, it's meant to provide awareness. And one of the national standards, really great tools, is providing you all with a template donor-initiated fundraising policy. We strongly encourage you, and in fact in the standards accreditation, we now require you to have a donor-initiated fundraising policy. And heck, maybe we'll put the word transferor in parenthesis in that title so everyone's really clear when this does and doesn't apply to them.
And Laura, before we move away from component funds, I just want to get up on my little soapbox and say a couple words, because I do tend to say this over and over again when I'm talking to community foundations on the phone here at the council. But when a group of people, another organization, someone comes to you and wants to start a geographic affiliate fund, and the decision is made that it become a component fund, that you will consider it a component fund, that group of people, those donors, those fundraisers, those community citizens, are getting something in return from you. They're getting something very valuable in return from you. They are getting your 501c3 status. They are getting the ability to allow donors to take tax deductions for contributions to the fund. They are getting the services of your community foundation in reporting those assets on your 990 and doing that accounting work and that reporting work for them. So this is a decision that they make, and benefits, real tangible benefits they're receiving in return. They can save money on the attorney filing the incorporation papers. They can save a lot of money on the attorney and the fees required to file for 501c3 status. So coming to you and becoming a component fund is a really valuable thing, and they are receiving a lot of value in return from you, the community foundation. And when relationships maybe are not the best, and they want to go off on their own, it doesn't hurt to remind them of the value that they receive from you, and to think about going out and doing it completely on their own. I think if they really thought about that, they would see the value of being a component fund. Yes, they may give up some control. They may have to agree to the variance power and the ultimate control of your board, but they are getting something very valuable in return, and I really don't want that to be forgotten in the mix here.
I love that, Suzanne. Value yourself. Own the work that you do. Make sure people are appreciating you. I know this work is hard sometimes. I know you're all understaffed. It doesn't matter what size your community foundation is. But you do provide value. You provide it every day, and whether it's seen or unseen, I agree with Suzanne. Let's start highlighting the value of the services we provide. In fact, some of our team today is working on the value of a public charity like community foundations holding donor advised funds. And it's not just that they're held until an advisory privilege, but it's held there, and the community foundation works with donors, and never ever undervalue that.
So we've just talked about component funds and what it takes to be a component fund at a community foundation. And typically it is a group of people or donors that have come to you to start the geographic affiliate that are not their own separate legal entity. But what about if there is a previously formed independent 501c3 charity that wants to associate with you and become a geographic affiliate of your community foundation? That is possible. That was one of the options that we referenced earlier. And actually there are a few more options available if the group is its own separate 501c3 charitable organization. Different ways you can affiliate or associate with that organization, provide services to them. Obviously, the first one would be the traditional component fund. That separate 501c3 charity would have to give up legal ownership of its assets, and this is really the agency fund model. They are a 501c3 charity. They come to you. They want to set up a fund with you because you're getting terrific investment returns and your management is great and efficient. So they want to set up a component fund at your community foundation. A separate charitable organization can do that as long as everyone understands what it means to be a component fund and everyone's in agreement that it will operate in that way. Again, the fund can be endowed or it can be non-endowed. There are both those options available. If by chance the group that is a separate 501c3 charity is not in agreement with all the requirements necessary for a component fund, for instance, they're not thrilled about the variance power and don't want to agree to be subject to the variance power or the ultimate control of your board, then they are a non-component fund. And in a minute, Laura's going to talk about some of the real issues associated with non-component funds. But that is an alternative. They would not be a component fund of your community foundation. You can provide services to them in a more contractual way, but that is one way that they can be associated with you. As I said, if the charity that comes to you and wants to establish a fund with you is in agreement and is okay with being a component fund, but they're concerned about an endowed fund and being limited to spending only the income from the fund, one compromise may be a non-endowed fund. As we said, any of these funds can be either endowment funds or non-endowed funds. So it may be that that would be the best structure. Have the charitable organization establish a component fund with you, but make it non-endowed to the extent that they are allowed to receive larger distributions than what they could with an endowment fund.
I love that idea, Suzanne, because it kind of gives, you know, a test or a pilot to whether the organization that's an independent 501c3 wants to be in a more formal relationship. So you all can start with a now endowed fund, see how the relationship and the dynamics between the two organizations work, and then move into the component fund and maybe some endowment. So that's interesting. You know, the non-endowed would still be a component fund, but it doesn't have quite as much longevity, right? They can have a little bit of money there, and then they can see how that goes. And I could see that being really attractive for an affiliate that is an independent 501c3 that wants to sort of make grants with others, kind of in a fiscal sponsorship, or join a big project and have the community foundation be the holder of some of those funds, so they had a non-endowed fund. I just really like the nuance there, and again, the options. So now that Suzanne's talked about these independent 501c3s a little bit, and you've heard the word non-component fund, I am here to say it is not as easy to have a non-component fund as you might think. And some of you are saying, like, I don't even know what it is, so I don't think it's easy. But think for a second. How many of you have ever drafted or seen a fund agreement with an agency or an affiliate that says you may unilaterally request return of your funds, and maybe it's not the exact wording, but the idea that the community foundation must give back the funds upon request or must do anything without board approval by somebody else is not accurate. So when you think about a non-component fund, it's not as easy as changing some language in a fund agreement. In fact, non-component funds are quite difficult, and you want to make sure that you're never drafting a fund agreement to accidentally look like a non-component fund, because then you get into a domino of a lot of investment issues. So I'm going to go through a couple of those right now. If your fund agreement accidentally or purposely creates a non-component fund because you're providing, again, that right to request the money back and just give it back without your governing board being involved, then you are technically managing a third party's money. You are not necessarily doing just your traditional community foundation component fund work. And maybe that's okay, and there's a handful of your colleagues who do this, but when I say a handful of the almost 800, I can literally count them on one hand. And they found a way that it fits within mission, and they've found the administrative resources, and the board has approved, and in some cases continues to review every few years and reapprove a decision like that. So first, what you want to be aware of is you might be managing third-party money. So is your mission to help nonprofits invest? Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. Second, there may be registration and licensing requirements for investment managers, and that's often dependent on state law, but you also have to look at things like SEC filings. And you not just look at them and think like, oh, I don't think this applies to me, but working with law firms, documenting how you put together your process. Think about the banking system. If you want to become someone that's got all the cumbersome regulations of the banking system, or maybe some of us say not cumbersome enough, but either way, there's a lot of stuff to do and a lot of people to report to, and you have to take this seriously. The third point is, do you have unrelated business income for these investments or administrative fees that are earned, because now you're doing something for a non-component fund, right? So either does it fit into your mission? If it doesn't fit enough, you may have unrelated business income. And whether you do or you don't, again, you have to know as an organization the rationale for whether you have it or not. It's not good enough to say like, I don't think so. I think if it's a mission, right, your board can't loosely decide these things, and your agreements can't act like anyone loosely decided these things. And just remember, if you do decide to go this route, those financial and investment professionals you sometimes work with on planned gifts may see you as competition. Again, I think only a handful of us have gotten as far as to that fourth point, but again, we are trying to emphasize here that drafting language in your agreements is really important. It's one of the reasons standards is so tough on this. It's one of the reasons standards asks you to have your board look at your fund agreement so that everyone understands this. We're trying to make sure you don't take this component fund idea too lightly, because the other side in non-component funds is a whole lot of regulation.